Prince Carlson of the Lylan Empire stood on the balcony of his palace, watching the fifth suitor of the day storm away in fury. The Jess princess, a fellow Nephilim, had lasted exactly 4 minutes before declaring his test impossible and beneath her dignity. Nephilims are known for their strength and prowess in combat. They are a warrior race after all. A puzzle game does not qualify as worth their time, and that's precisely why, Carlson thought, a simple thing should not involve your ego, should you rule over more complex things. Your Highness, his advisor chittered nervously, tail twitching. Perhaps we should reconsider the parameters. The high nobility grows restless. Carlson's silver eyes narrowed. His skin shimmered in blue, delicate veins under the two suns' lights, reflecting his determination. The test stands. I will not bond with someone who cannot demonstrate basic problem-solving and humility. Unlike the brood of the Nephilims in the Empire and his brothers, Carlson was not a warrior, he was more of a scholar. But his brothers died recently and the royal line is in jeopardy. He had to have an heir soon. But just because he perfectly understood the imperative didn't mean he would accept anyone as a consort. The test he came up with reflected that it was a compromise between his father and the council's need for a strong heir and Carlson's intolerance for stupidity. It was deceptively simple. Reassemble a child's puzzle cube while explaining their philosophy of leadership. Yet royals after royals had either refused to touch a commoner's toy or had fumbled with it while spouting rehearsed platitudes about conquest and glory. As the advisor scurried away, Carlson noticed movement in the corridor below. A figure in plain grey uniform was methodically cleaning the marble floors. Seraphim by the looks of it. His long white hair was simply tied back in a low ponytail. Seraphims, the continent's newest human species, just newly integrated. It's been 15 years now. They had arrived through portals inside multiple dungeons. They say they come from another continent named Erin. Their mastery of dimension magic greatly helped the openings of new stages and dungeon floors, improving the magical balance somehow. This breaching of the glass floor earned them provisional status among the Union. Moreover, it seemed they were compatible partners for most other human species, and hybrid offspring were starting to appear. They had the unique ability of being hermaphrodites all year round, unlike the Nephilims, who can only activate that ability under strict conditions. But most of them were not fighters, which made them appear weak to Nephilims. This one worked with quiet efficiency. As Carlson watched, he paused to carefully move a decorative vase before mopping, then returned it to its exact position. "You there?" Carlson called out. The Seraphim looked up, startled. "Sir? Your Highness?" He attempted an awkward bow that nearly sent his mop clattering. "What is your name?" "Akeem, Your Highness. Akeem Topaz. Maintenance staff. I'll clear out if I'm in the way." "Come up here, Akeem." Confusion was evident, but he obeyed. Seraphims had white markings on their skins, where Nephilim's markings were blue. Akeem's markings were completely rested, not a single shimmer from them. Controlled, it seemed. There was more to this janitor than what appeared. Minutes later he stood before him, still clutching his mop like a security blanket. "Do you know who I am?" Carlson asked. "Prince Carlson. Everyone knows about the imperial selection." His language had a peculiar accent. "I heard it's not going well." An understatement, at best. Carlson retrieved the puzzle cube from his desk. "Tell me, Akeem, can you solve this?" He put down his mop and examined the cube. "Rubik's Cube?" "Sure, but this one seems different. 6 sides, but irregular mirrored shapes instead of little colored squares." His hands began moving, twisting the segments. "Interesting," he mumbled. "The centerpieces rotate independently, too." Carlson felt something shift in his chest. He touched it, the toy, he touched it without hesitation or disdain. "While you are solving it, tell me what makes a good leader." Akeem's hands continued their steady motion. "I'm just a janitor, Your Highness. But back in Erin, I was in the service. As a soldier, I saw some combat before the big integration. And from experience, I would say that a good leader knows the mission matters more than their pride." There was a click from the cube in his hand. He kept twisting it. They remember that every person in their unit has value. From the general to the guy cleaning latrines, 2 sides aligned. They adapt when the plan falls apart because it always does. 3 sides. And they never ask someone to do something they wouldn't do themselves. 4 sides. 5. Carlson studied him. He was more pretty than handsome when you looked closer. Seraphins had an overall androgynous look that most other races hated, but Nephilims secretly adored. The royals who came before you, Akeem said softly, princes and princesses, dukes and duchesses, they spoke of glory, conquest, legacy. Akeem looked up for a moment. Carlson was looking at his hands and the puzzle. The prince looked tired. Those things happen because of good leadership, not the other way around. 6 sides complete. He held up the solved cube. You lead well, and glory follows. You chase glory, and your people suffer. Carlson took the cube from his hands. Their fingers touched briefly. Seraphins ran warm, but Nephilims ran warmer. A spark appeared between them, lighting their markings briefly. They both froze. The breaching, the prince said, your people's first contact. I read the reports. You should have been slaughtered in there. Those dungeon monsters were unbeaten, probably for millennia. Akeem's expression darkened. We lost a lot of good people in there, but we had something they didn't expect. Which was? We didn't know we couldn't win, we didn't quit. He smiled, but there was steel in it. When you've got nothing left but spite and ingenuity, you get creative. It seemed Seraphins really came to seek their own salvation. They didn't come purely to better our own world. The fact that the former and the latter came hand in hand was a happy accident. Carlson walked to the balcony. Below, another suitor was arriving, the Thornian Duke, no doubt in his ridiculous ceremonial armor and his equally ridiculous claim of the title of strongest. The selection would have to end eventually, putting an end to this parade of warriors who never fought a single war. Even with his royal father being more open than most about the selection of his consort, he could not delay his choice indefinitely. Do you know what happens if I choose no one here? Political marriage to someone the council selects precisely for the good of the empire. He turned to face Akeem. I have one final question, Seraphin. The use of his race and not his name surprised Akeem. The prince somehow looked even more serious. He was tall now that he was no longer looking at his own hands. He was tall but lean, not the usual silhouettes of Nephilims, probably less into combat. Your Highness, if you were in charge of an empire's defenses and faced an enemy you could not defeat through conventional means, what would you do? Akeem thought for a moment. Find out what they need that you have, then make taking it more trouble than it's worth. I think we, Seraphins, are great at that. Carlson laughed, actually laughed. When was the last time? Akeem froze for a moment. He was beautiful like this. The contrast between now and the sad look he gave him earlier. It's beautiful. Never mind that his red hair was all over the place. My father thinks I'm being foolish with this test. That leadership cannot be measured with a child's toy. Akeem considered this. Can I be honest, Your Highness? Carlson smiled, a real smile. Asking permission to speak honestly? That's all he ever wanted. Please, he said, I think it's not about the cube. It's about whether someone will do something simple without making it complicated because of their ego. A flush appeared on the prince's cheek, his heart rate picked up, and his markings suddenly flashed. But Akeem didn't see. He turned and picked up his mop again. I should get back to work before I'm fired for fraternizing. Akeem. Sir, Carlson felt the weight of decision settle on his shoulders. His advisor would have a cardiac episode, the whole lot of nobility would be scandalized, and his father would need significant convincing. But he had watched, just for today, 5 royals fail a simple test, and he had watched one Seraphin janitor succeed without even trying. It didn't help that his body was buzzing with a sudden urge to keep this man close. The royal selection, he said slowly, is open to all eligible citizens of member species. Akeem froze. Your Highness, I'm a janitor. I clean floors. You were a warrior who fought when victory was impossible. You solve problems without complaint. You understand leadership. Carlson picked up the cube again. And you're the only one who passed my test. Akeem was hesitant. This is insane. You are telling me you want me to be your consort? Don't you need an heir? Isn't that why you are doing this? I can carry if you don't want to, was the reply. A violent blush appeared on Akeem's face. No, I can. I mean, you shouldn't. I mean, I want to. Carlson laughed again, and his skin shimmered a deep blue, amusement and determination. That seemed to stop Akeem's embarrassment for a bit. He still stammered. You are the prince, the sole heir. You should lead. You should. I am not a leader, interrupted Carlson. I never was and never will be. One of my brothers should have had the throne, not me. But fate had it other ways, and I think fate just gave me you. Akeem looked at his mob, then at the prince, then at the elaborate palace around them. Finally, that edge smile returned tinted with a subtle blush. Sir, when this goes sideways, and it will, I'm going to remind you this was your idea. Carlson said, and accepted. Now, Seraphim Akeem Topaz of Erin, we have a great deal of work to do, starting with teaching you proper court etiquette. And if I fail to learn that, then you'll fail honestly, which is more than I can say for the alternatives. He extended his hand. Deal? Akeem looked at his hand and clasped it firmly. Deal. And brought it to his mouth for a light kiss. Below, the Thornian Duke entered the palace, expecting a test he could easily manipulate. He would be very disappointed by Carlson's news. The Chamberlain was called immediately to help Akeem move quarters. He was shown to the West Wing initially, guest quarters for important visitors. He understood that he was not yet considered a consort. Otherwise, he would have been led in the prince's residence. His quarters turned out to be a suite larger than anything he ever had as a soldier. It was simple but artful and fine. Multiple windows overlooked a private garden that he never had access to as a simple janitor. Please rest, said the Chamberlain. The king will see you tomorrow. Then he was left alone, and he finally let himself process what was happening. What was he doing? Did he really just agree to marry the prince, just like that? The idea was really insane, but there was something compelling about the prince. He stood at one of the windows overlooking the garden and studied the play of lights in the early evening. He never stopped to consider it before. He never paid much attention to political landscape in this empire. But the royal selection has been going on for some time now, and to say that it was going poorly was mild. Prince Carlson had already a poor reputation, not being a warrior was already unique as a royal, and then he had to go and offer a puzzle box for a test of leadership. He appeared even more eccentric to the mass, weaker and unfit to rule. But Akeem saw it. He saw the loneliness, he saw the tough decisions, he saw maturity in Carlson's will to defer. That was not weakness. And Akeem, for all his wanderings these last few years, yearned for a new place to stay. Although he admitted to himself he was more thinking of a woman and children in a farm than a prince in a castle. Same difference, he said out loud. You also just want a place to stay, don't you? Carlson? Meanwhile, Carlson, after dismissing the Duke, also regained his chambers. His thoughts naturally drifted to Akeem, the ease with which he passed the test. His blush when talking about carrying a child, his whitish-blue hair, his focused eyes on the puzzle, those eyes. Those dark blue eyes, as blue as the first setting sun sky, there's experience in them. Experience of a lifetime lived on battlefield, experience of another culture, experience of other lovers probably. Carlson blushed at that thought. Lover? He was only first looking for a partner. He didn't think he'd find someone he could be attracted to. And yet, he could feel himself leaning toward Akeem in his mind. He was never one to have such straight thought before. He found himself having trouble sleeping that night. Carlson's father, King Edward, was unexpectedly not that hard to convince once he heard the news. He didn't care that Akeem was a janitor. He cared that he was a soldier. Rank and missions was the first question he ever addressed to Akeem when Carlson introduced him during the council. The king was tall and broad, still very much in shape for his age, but his eyes were tired. He didn't have time for theatre. Akeem understood that. He understood that very much. Retired. Major of the 2nd Squadron and commander of the Black Opal Platoon. The large council chamber fell quiet. The smell of a stuffed room suddenly became very present. Carlson turned slowly and fully to him. Black Opal? I take it you know it. Yes, my missions were essentially rescue missions. Rescue missions? The king bellowed. He was standing now. His markings flashed brightly until even the air around him glowed faintly. You're the one who rescued one of the Thornian prince in the northern dungeon. Prince Aegis? Yes. And the one who rescued a whole squad from the 46th chamber? Yes. And a colony of Zevrims from a catastrophe-level magical beast in the edges? Akeem was uncomfortable now. You obviously know me, so why? No, I don't, obviously. He interrupted. What's a hero like you doing cleaning my floors? Hero? I just retired. I wanted to see the world we had integrated. As a janitor? I still have to earn money somehow. I saw quite a bit before arriving here. I hadn't planned on staying long, though, he said, turning back to look at Carlson, who was now looking at him with an unreadable look. It unsettled him bit, somehow, that the prince's opinion of him mattered now. Are you disappointed? He asked, unsure. Carlson was processing. He had restraint, he was sure of that. He had control. He was a prince. That was engraved in him from the moment he could talk. Even more so since he could sire a child and a seal has been placed in him. He was not, under any circumstances, to have those urges outside of a sanctioned union. The seal guaranteed it. Royal bloodline were fiercely guarded. The seal could only break after the soul binding. Only then will his drive awaken, allowing him to fulfill his duties to his consort and produce an heir. That was always the way. That's how strong heirs were born, through careful selecting and breeding. But this man, this pretty thing who had passed his test, who blushed while thinking about having baby, was also a real hero for many, and still humble. He felt it then, a crack, a sharp ache in his spleen where magical seal resided, and then a rush of sensation from his sex to his chest. He didn't know what it was, but he knew that he didn't blush over every other life story. He was as red as his hair. His markings were flashing lightly. Akeem's eyes widened, the blue of Carlson's markings reflecting in his eyes. Carlson, still silent, Carlson looked at Akeem's mouth. It was moving, speaking, he supposed, but that's not relevant right now. He needed to touch. He kissed him, hard and clumsy. He didn't care. Touching was the goal. He brought his hands to Akeem's face for more, stepped right in his personal space to completely glue himself to him from head to toe. And Akeem was there, touching back, half smiling. I guess you are not, he murmured when Carlson finally broke away, his markings finally dimming. Carlson finally realized what he had done and froze. Slowly he lifted his gaze from Akeem's mouth and looked around. There was shock on most counselors' faces, which was to be expected, but there was amusement on his father's. Father? 3 months. What? You have 3 months to prepare the wedding. Get out, he said, and sat back down. Carlson needed not to be told twice. He took Akeem's hand and with a joyful smile ran out of the room and into the next step of their relationship. 3 months later, the soul-binding ceremony was held. It was unimaginably chaotic and grand. Carlson's father had aggressively distributed invitations to all kingdoms and empires. Delegations from all around the continent rushed to offer their congratulations. During that time, Carlson and Akeem's relation evolved. Discovery and restraint were the main law of their world. Carlson courted Akeem, there was no other word for it. He showed him parts of the castle, the rooftop garden where his favorite flowers grew, his study which was incredibly messy, and also the adjacent library and all his favorite books, where Akeem was surprised to discover there were Seraphim authors. Books are like magic spells. They will affect the author, the reader, but the meaning will be different on each pair. Oh, Akeem said, I never thought to look at them like that. Carlson smiled. It's not a popular way of thinking. It's a wise one, Carlson. Carlson looked down, a bit shy. Do you have a book to recommend me? Akeem came closer. The physical attraction between them was obvious. Their marking reacted to each other completely without their consent. It was almost comical to see the dancing light of their skins when they were in proximity to each other. But it was Carlson who experienced the more discomfort. The royal seal on his bloodline has been fractured by his intense attraction to Akeem. Some nights he would wake up aching with a need for Akeem that was almost painful. He still couldn't act on it. His body was still locked away, but the emotions and the wanting was beginning to border on torture. But he kept control, he kept a careful restraint in his touch, trying to take things slowly. But emotion-wise, he was already completely gone for his fiancée. Akeem, who was used to lead, to make all the decisions, was completely swept away by this prince who looked at him with tenderness and longing. In turn, Akeem talked about his time in the military, speaking about victory and loss in equal measure. He talked about his travels and the gems he found on his way. I am trying to collect specific gemstone for specific places. They were walking in one of the greenhouses where Carlson kept his rarer plants. When did you start? In the military. At first, I collected a gemstone on every other mission. Since my missions took me to many places, I started to have quite the sample size. Some of my squadmate began to collect them for me over the years, he recalled fondly. Carlson smiled. What gemstone did you associate with this location? Akeem looked at him, really looked. Like he tried to read something. I don't know yet, he said. I am still here, right? Carlson took a step toward him and kissed him. It was not always easy. The public announcement of Prince Carlson's engagement and subsequent wedding Hodi sent a shockwave through the known world. After all, Akeem was just a soldier, and a seraphim at that. Between the purist of the bloodline and the more traditionalists on soul-binding, Akeem was the subject of a vicious scrutiny from literal strangers. His records were found, his military career dissected. Comments were rude, cruel, invasive. Lord Valerian specifically was aggressively against the marriage. He was of high nobility and part of the council. He couldn't overrule the king's decision, but he still gathered quite the support from other members of the council. Carlson knew from their interactions that Akeem didn't care, but his father was more uncertain. The king came to find Akeem one day and asked his opinion on the matter of the people's reaction. They don't know me yet. Speculation is unavoidable. Edward almost forgot who that man was. He smiled. Very well. What about Carlson? They don't know him either still, but I suppose it's going to change. You only know someone once they did something to you. Carlson never ruled. He never was implicated in politics. It's changing, but it needs time. The king nodded. I will leave you to it. He turned and left the room. He felt relieved somehow, like a part of the weight he has been carrying suddenly lifted. The wedding was flawless. Red, the royal color, littered the capital. The grooms were also clad in red marital garments. When they both reached the altar, Akeem noted the raw, unfiltered look of devotion in Carlson's eyes. It took his breath away. The high priest completely opened the seal in front of the whole court and bound their soul. A sudden invasive feeling of love and hope rushed in Akeem, and he understood that it was Carlson's, and Carlson couldn't wait. It was overwhelming. He kissed him before the high priest even finished the vows. It was deep and slow, while the whole court erupted around them. The heir had let himself imagine 1,000 scenarios for their wedding night. He couldn't help himself. He was a dreamer. But nothing prepared him for Akeem treating their bed like a military campaign. As soon as the door to the bedroom closed behind them, and they both saw the petal-covered giant bed, there was a shift in the air, a nervousness that wasn't present before. I have something for you, blurted Akeem. He marched into the room, and to draw of the bedside table, he retrieved a small box and sat on the bed. What is it? Carlson asked, glad for the distraction. Akeem opened the box for him and presented it. A huge deep blue gemstone was inside. A gem. Carlson sat next to him, his eyes widened. Yes, it's a topaz. It's a rather common gemstone, but blue ones are rare. This one belonged to my grandfather. It has been in the family for quite some time, and it's now yours to pass on. He looked up at Carlson, but he was frowning. Carlson, why didn't I know your name was a gemstone? I'm disappointed in myself. The sheer outrage coming from him was so at odds with his earlier awed expression that Akeem burst out laughing. Well, now you know. But you probably already have dozens of jewelries and even more gems that you can count somehow. Somewhere in your vaults, probably, surely. I mean, well, you know. He was rambling. Again, Carlson let himself go. He took Akeem's head in his hands and kissed him. The kiss became rapidly heavy and aggressive, fueled by the unbidden want of Carlson's freed body. They moved completely in the middle of the bed as he pushed Akeem on his back. Akeem understood very quickly that the prince had spent the last 3 months restraining himself almost to the point of pain. Now the restraint was gone. Their breathing rapidly grew heavy. It was like he was intoxicated. He wasn't sure he was the one controlling his body anymore. After an eternity of desperate kissing, Carlson opened Akeem's outer garments, revealing a sliver of his collarbone. He bent back down to kiss it, just because he could, and that's when he felt it. They were both aroused. Carlson recoiled abruptly, but stayed where he was, straddling Akeem. "I need to tell you something," he said. Akeem's hands were drawing circles on his hips and thighs, which was not helping. "Yeah?" His voice has gone deeper. "You know I've never done this, right?" He chuckled a bit. His cheeks were growing pink with blush. "I know. Did you have something in mind?" How did he know that? How was it that he always knew what to say? His blush intensified. Akeem waited. He kept caressing his thighs. Hesitantly, he asked, "Would you, may I have you?" Silence. Akeem's eyes bulged out. His markings completely stopped flaring. It's okay if—" "Yes," Akeem practically screamed. "Yes, I want to." They both looked at each other and laughed again. "I will have you, Carlson," he said, smiling and breathless. "Okay, then." And he dove back down to claim the man who just gave himself to him. He became even more aggressive, a mix of eagerness and naive exploration. Akeem's heart was like a war drum in his ears, and his breathing became erratic, like he couldn't get enough air. He has always been top. He didn't know why, but his previous male partners always asked that of him, or they assumed he will top. Now that he thought about it, he never asked for something else for himself. He is glad Carlson asked. "Undress me," came the demand. Carlson looked up from Akeem's neck and started doing just that. Then he hesitated. "Undress yourself and come back here." And he does. This is nice, he thought, taking of his robes. This is so much nicer than his imagination. Back above Akeem, Carlson proceeded to kiss every inch of his face first, then his neck, his collarbone, and lower on his chest. Akeem breathed heavily, staying in place, letting his now husband do the work for now. It was a surprisingly pleasant change of pace. Carlson was eager, sometimes clumsy with his movement, but it made the act so much more unique, Akeem actually thought he would lose it before it even began. He needed him to slow down. He took back his hands from Carlson's hair to his face and pulled him up into another kiss. "I am not going anywhere, Carlson," he said. Carlson looked at him with surprise. "How is it that you always know what I'm thinking?" Carlson asked helplessly. Akeem smiled softly beneath him. One of his hands slid down from Carlson's face to his waist, slow and steady, grounding rather than demanding. "Because," he said quietly, "you look at me like every feeling you've ever had arrived all at once." Carlson made a wounded sound at that, somewhere between embarrassment and desire, and dropped forward until his forehead rested against Akeem's shoulder. "It's unbearable," he admitted. The confession hung between them. Not lust, not even fear. Just honesty. Akeem's expression gentled immediately. He threaded his fingers through Carlson's loose red hair, carefully untangling strands from the ceremonial braids that had half fallen apart during the kissing. "Hey," he murmured. "Look at me." Carlson obeyed after a moment. His eyes were bright, overwhelmed. His markings pulsed in frantic blue beneath his skin, answering every little touch Akeem gave him. "You don't have to prove anything tonight," Akeem said. "Not to me. We've got time." "But I know. Come here," he murmured. Carlson went immediately, almost startling them both with how instinctive it was. Akeem wrapped both arms around him and rolled them carefully across the flower-covered bed until Carlson was half tucked against his chest. For a while they simply stayed there, touching, breathing, learning. Carlson seemed incapable of remaining still for long. Every few seconds his fingers would resume exploring, as though he needed constant reassurance that Akeem was real and truly his now. Soul-bound, wanted, safe. He pushed on his elbow and got back on top of Akeem. Carlson pressed him deeper into the mattress, breathing hard through every kiss, hands restless against his body as though touch itself had become urgent. Their discarded ceremonial robes tangled around their legs, while flower petals crushed beneath shifting weight. Beautiful disaster, Akeem thought. He let Carlson take what he needed for a while. The prince moved over him with desperate fascination, kissing his throat, his chest, the white markings shimmering under his skin. Every reaction Akeem gave seemed to affect Carlson instantly. His breathing would hitch, his grip would tighten, his markings flashed violently blue whenever Akeem made a sound. Too responsive, too honest. Akeem was beginning to understand why the entire Imperial court found Carlson unsettling. Nothing stayed hidden in him. Carlson pushed himself upright suddenly, flushed and disheveled, loose red hair falling around his face. He looked down at Akeem with visible uncertainty, despite the hunger still burning underneath it. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. Akeem almost smiled. There it is again. That honesty. Most nobles would rather die than say those words aloud. Akeem reached up and caught Carlson gently by the wrist before he could retreat into embarrassment. "You're paying attention," he said. "That matters more." Carlson looked at him carefully after that, studying his face the same way he studied everything else. Then his gaze dropped lower. Focused. Akeem felt the shift immediately. Carlson was no longer trying to survive the moment. He was trying to understand how to make Akeem feel good. Interesting. The prince leaned down again, slower this time, hands sliding deliberately along Akeem's body instead of wandering blindly. Experimental touches, watching for reactions. Akeem inhaled sharply when Carlson's mouth brushed the sensitive spot beneath his jaw. Carlson froze, then repeated it immediately. Akeem laughed under his breath. "Oh, dangerous." Carlson looked genuinely pleased with himself. That expression alone nearly undid Akeem. "You liked that," Carlson observed quietly. Yes, the immediate answer visibly affected him. Akeem could practically see the realization settling into Carlson's mind. He was capable of this too. Capable of affecting someone, of driving someone apart with want. The prince swallowed hard and moved again with growing confidence. Carlson shifted lower between Akeem's thighs, broad hands spreading instinctively over muscle and skin. Akeem let him explore for a moment before guiding him properly, one hand settling warm against the back of Carlson's neck. "Slower," he murmured. Carlson obeyed immediately. That should not have been attractive, Akeem thought. He tightened his hand in Carlson's hair slightly, guiding rather than forcing, and felt Carlson shiver hard beneath the touch. The prince reacted intensely to direction, to approval. Every small sound Akeem made only sharpened his focus further. "You learn fast," Akeem said quietly. Carlson looked up at him then, his red eyes bright, mouth flushed from kissing, completely intent. "You matter," he answered simply, as though that explained everything. Akeem's chest tightened unexpectedly. That was the problem with Carlson. He said things plainly. No manipulation, no court performance, no games. Just truth delivered directly enough to slip past defenses before you realized what happened. Akeem pulled him back up immediately and kissed him hard enough to steal the rest of his breath. Carlson made a startled sound against his mouth before melting into it completely. Their bodies shifted together across the massive bed, tangled in heat and silk and half-opened clothing. Carlson ended up sprawled partly over Akeem's chest again, breathing unevenly while Akeem's hands settled firmly on his hips. "You realize," Akeem murmured against his ear, "that you become much bolder the second you stop thinking." Carlson laughed softly, still breathless. "I noticed that too." "And," the prince looked down at him with dangerous sincerity, his hands roaming, "I think I want to stop thinking tonight." Well, that was possibly the hottest thing Akeem had ever heard in his life. Carlson pressed his tongue on Akeem's hot throat. He followed the white markings on his pulse point, seeing them flicker beneath his touch. And Akeem gasped, lifting his hands to Carlson's hair. Playing with Carlson's hair, not pulling or controlling, just touching and feeling their rough texture. The prince directed his wandering hands directly over Akeem's sex and was rewarded by a low moan. He kept his tongue and mouth busy over Akeem's torso, marveling at the reactions he could tear from this powerful man: a hitched breath, a wiggle, a tightening of his hand on his head, a twitch of his muscles. He was beginning to wonder why he was denied this kind of connection at all. He kept massaging and caressing Akeem's erection, and when his head reached his hand, he did not hesitate for a second and took it in his mouth. The groan and back-arching he got in return were worth the strange taste in his mouth. It wasn't good per se, but he could do with it if he could have that reaction again. "Yes, please," Akeem breathily pleaded. "Kay." His head was thrown back, His chest was off the mattress as Carlson began sucking and moving over him in earnest. One of his hands kept playing with Carlson's hair, while the other went to his own hair trying to ground himself. It had been a while since he's been with anyone, and even then it was not like this. He was used to more experienced partners who knew what to give, what to take, and be done with it. Efficient. This was not it. Carlson was giving and giving. He should stop him again. He started, then gasped when Carlson put one of his fingers inside him without any preamble. He was wet and the slide was absolutely delicious, even as he was still in Carlson's mouth. He was moaning more loudly now, started thrashing his head from side to side. Carlson didn't want to stop. The more Akeem reacted, the more he wanted to please him. He was rubbing himself subtly on the mattress. His own arousal was starting to ache and needed touching. Akeem didn't see. He was too lost in his own pleasure to notice. Carlson's mouth was moving over him, and even though his finger barely moved, the tip of it was right on the spot when he wiggled it. This man was going to be dangerous if it was really his first time, Akeem thought. Carlson released him with a loud noise, breathing heavily. Still kneeling between his legs, he began moving his finger properly while looking at Akeem's face through his eyelashes with a wild hunger. His markings were pulsating slowly, elevating his temperature above normal. Distantly, Akeem thought that it was probably due to the broken seal. Carlson's drive was peaking, and Akeem concluded that he probably couldn't be stopped right now, even if he wanted to. He was fine with that. Carlson was preparing him faster now, his movement much more urgent. He added a finger while pumping faster, and interpreting Akeem's groan as approval, he added a third roughly. Akeem cried out in pleasure. He really didn't mind the roughness. In fact, he appeared to enjoy it surprisingly. What a discovery to make in his 40s. Here is this 29-year-old virgin Prince Charming teaching him to enjoy sex. His squad would be having a field day with it. Carlson was enthralled. He was looking at his husband and seeing him enjoying himself. He wanted to give him more. He reluctantly stopped his hand and got back to his eye level before kissing him. Akeem was breathing hard now and squirming under him. "I want to spoil you," Carlson muttered. Akeem blushed, which was strange considering what they were doing. "Yeah?" he answered. "Yes." "Well, you're doing a great job of that," he breathed, bringing Carlson back down to kiss him. Then Carlson turned him on his stomach. Akeem braced himself for a quick penetration, but Carlson draped himself on his back, putting himself between his legs. He was hot, literally. "Akeem," he murmured, kissing his shoulder blade. He felt Carlson's arousal on his ass and arched his back, spreading his legs wider. He moved his hips, trying to encourage Carlson inside him. "Carlson," he answered, panting. "Please." A deep moan came from Carlson. Like a confirmation to a command, he lined himself with his hand before slowly entering his husband. "Gods. Oh, hell," gasped Akeem. Carlson kept his mouth on Akeem's back, kissing him, licking him, and occasionally biting while he sank deeper and deeper. Without hesitation or slowing down, he kept sinking in until his hips were flush with Akeem's. The Seraphim was breathing heavily now, moaning between ragged breaths, sweating profusely and completely blissed out of his mind, while Carlson was fully subsumed in him. "You," he panted, "you are—" Carlson answered, lost in his own instinct and bliss. He didn't move yet, kept lavishing Akeem's back with affectionate bites. He's inside, Akeem thought. He had never before imagined himself on the receiving end. That was never him. Was it always this good, or was it just Carlson? Then he felt it, not just the press of him inside, but the heat, the pulse, the quiver that touched something deep inside him. He groaned loudly, tilting his hips back for more. Then Carlson moved, keeping his hips flush against Akeem. He first just ground himself harder, drawing circles inside, not retreating. Akeem had never felt something like this. The pleasure was completely foreign to him. Was it because of the broken seal? He couldn't care less about the specifics right now, though. He wanted more. Moaning more wantonly, he pushed himself more firmly on Carlson's arousal. Only then did Carlson get the message and began moving in earnest. A slow rhythm first, gaining strength and speed. Akeem arched his body beautifully, fueling Carlson's need to satisfy him even more. He was being loud. He rarely made any noise during sex, usually, but he couldn't help himself here. His hands were fisted in the sheets next to his head. He was propped on his elbows while on his belly. His legs were trembling. The more he reacted, the more attentive Carlson became. And the more attentive he became, the higher the pleasure, which made him react even more unrestrained. It was a glorious circle, self-feeding itself. And it only had one inevitable conclusion. Wait, I can't. Akeem tried, out of breath. His markings were almost sparkling now, responding to Carlson's touch on their own. The room was stiflingly hot and was starting to shimmer from their combined aura. The edge was approaching fast. Again, Carlson panted. Again. He drove home even faster, deeper. Akeem was lost, moaning and thrashing under the prince. Pleasure like never before flooded his body, even as his orgasm just happened. Suddenly, Carlson went rigid as his own orgasm slammed into him hard and unexpected. He felt pleasure like a coiled tide of energy from the place where he joined with Akeem and felt it spring through to his whole body, getting higher and higher and higher. It was almost painful. He couldn't see that beneath him. Akeem was feeling every bit of it through their bond, triggering a second impossible orgasm. The room was bursting with their aura, rearranging themselves around each other, the sound of it drowned between loud, breathless panting and moans of euphoria. Finally, Carlson collapsed right on top of Akeem before withdrawing and taking him into his arms. Their markings were dimming and their skins cooling. Akeem's arms came up to touch Carlson's chest, dragging his fingers through sweat. He breathed his hair in, a mix of sweat and camellia perfume grounding him. Then Akeem said, smiling, "You are doing me again in a minute," tapping lightly on his chest. Carlson burst out laughing. "Am I now?" he said, still giggling. "Yes, you are, husband," Akeem answered, feeling and looking pleased and content. The attacks began subtly. At first, Carlson almost missed them, a remark during council sessions about foreign military customs, a question regarding Seraphin loyalty structures, an observation that retiring at the peak of one's fame was strategically convenient, nothing direct or actionable. That was what made it effective. The nobility could not openly oppose the emperor's decision. Edward still held executive authority, commanded the military personally, and retained equal legislative power to the council itself. But the noble houses understood something Carlson had spent most of his life studying in books, rather than experiencing firsthand. Power rarely attacked head-on when it could erode instead. And erosion was patient. Akeem noticed it long before Carlson did. Not because he was smarter than Carlson, frankly, very few people were, but because military politics and noble politics smelled the same once stripped bare enough. Possession, influence, narrative. The first few weeks, Akeem ignored it. Then the nobles escalated. Remarkable, Lord Valerian mused one afternoon during a military budget review, that a man trusted with rescue operations of such sensitivity would simply vanish afterward. One wonders what exactly motivated such restraint. Akeem continued reading the report in front of him. Carlson answered before he could. "My husband's discharge records were verified personally by the Imperial Military Office." "Of course," Valerian replied smoothly, "but records state facts. They do not reveal intentions." Carlson's jaw tightened. Akeem rested one hand lightly against his wrist beneath the council table. "Not now." Carlson stilled immediately. That became the pattern. The nobles pressed. Carlson reacted. Akeem grounded him, but the attacks continued growing sharper. If Prince Consort Akeem truly rejected political ambition, another councillor remarked days later, "Why marry directly into the imperial line?" "Because your future emperor asked nicely," Akeem replied without looking up. Several councillors choked, trying not to laugh. Carlson nearly smiled despite himself. Valerian did not, and the nobles adapted again. Soon the questions became targeted not at Akeem's actions, but at Carlson's judgment. "You are exceptionally intelligent, Your Highness," Lady Sarah said one evening with careful gentleness. "Surely you understand the importance of perception in governance." Carlson's expression cooled immediately. "What perception concerns you specifically?" "That love," she said delicately, "may impair otherwise rational analysis." Akeem felt Carlson tense beside him. Not anger this time. Doubt. That was the dangerous part. Carlson trusted reason deeply. Appealing to his analytical nature was infinitely more effective than insulting him outright. You designed an entire royal selection process to avoid emotional manipulation, Lady Sarah continued softly. Yet now you refuse to examine the political implications of a hero whose disappearance coincided so conveniently with rising fame and military influence. Carlson said nothing, which frightened Akeem more than anger would have, because Carlson was actually considering it. Not because he distrusted Akeem, because he distrusted himself. After the session, Carlson remained alone in his study long after midnight. Akeem found him surrounded by open reports and military records. There it is, then. The nobles had finally managed to wound him properly. Carlson did not look up immediately when Akeem entered. "They're trying to make me question my own objectivity," he said quietly. Akeem came close to him and leaned against the desk, close to Carlson and facing him. "And is it working?" A long silence. "A little. Honest. Always honest." "Gods." Akeem reached down slowly and closed the nearest report with one hand. "Carlson." The prince finally looked up, not fearful, not suspicious, ashamed, as though doubting at all felt like betrayal. Akeem understood that expression too. "You chose me because I answered your questions honestly," he said calmly. "So ask," Carlson exhaled slowly. "Why did you really leave? Not accusatory, just worried." Akeem studied him for a moment before answering. "Because they stopped letting me save people quietly." Carlson frowned faintly. "In the beginning," Akeem continued, "the missions mattered. Then the victories mattered. Then the narratives mattered." He walked toward the windows overlooking the capital. "I started noticing noble sponsors appearing beside rescue operations they had nothing to do with. Reports rewritten to favor political factions. Casualties adjusted depending on which territories required military funding." His jaw hardened slightly. People discussing disaster zones like investment opportunities. Carlson watched him carefully. "I was offered promotion," Akeem admitted, "but not because they needed me in command. They wanted a symbol, a decorated Seraphim war hero loyal to specific political interests. And you refused." "Yes." Carlson's gaze sharpened immediately. "You understood what that refusal would cost you." "Of course. Then why?" Akeem looked back at him fully now. "Because politics is supposed to serve people, Carlson, not consume them." The prince went very still. Akeem saw the exact moment those words rooted themselves somewhere deep. But before Carlson could answer back to Lady Sarah, the situation worsened. A formal accusation was submitted before the Imperial Council. Not treason, nothing so crude, conflict of interest, undisclosed political affiliations. Questions regarding military loyalty during his final years of service. Enough to force public discussion, enough to humiliate Carlson openly. The council chamber overflowed the day of the hearing. Nobles, military officers, foreign observers, political scavengers. They all wanted to see whether the future emperor's marriage had become a liability. Carlson entered in full imperial red. Akeem entered beside him, not behind. That alone caused murmurs. The accusations began immediately. Lord Valerian led most of them personally. "Is it not true," he asked smoothly, "that your retirement occurred directly after refusing strategic promotion?" "Yes. And that said promotion would have granted substantial military influence?" "Yes. And that shortly afterward you entered proximity to the imperial succession?" "If by shortly you mean a few years, then yes." Valerian spread his hand slightly, ignoring the correction. "Surely you understand how this appears." Akeem almost smiled. "There it is. Not truth. Appearance. The favorite religion of a weak man." Carlson spoke before he could stop himself. "This proceeding is absurd." "No," Valerian replied. "It is governance." Carlson's markings flashed violently blue. Akeem touched his arm once, steadying. The prince inhaled sharply through his nose and forced himself silent. The nobles continued pressing, layer by layer, question by question. By the end of it, even the king looked troubled. Not convinced, but concerned. Edward was too experienced not to recognize manipulation, but here he was emperor before being a father. Doubt itself was dangerous around succession. The chamber eventually fell silent, waiting. Akeem rose slowly from his seat. No theatrical flourish, no outrage, just presence. And suddenly the room remembered this man had once commanded entire platoons of soldiers. When I was younger, Akeem began calmly, I thought leadership meant being the strongest person in the room. His voice carried effortlessly across the chamber. That's what I thrived for in the army. Then I entered the northern dungeons. Silence settled immediately. You learn very quickly in places like that strength alone is worthless. His dark eyes moved across the gathered nobles. Strength cannot hold a collapsing passage. Strength cannot ration supplies correctly. Strength cannot keep frightened soldiers from breaking apart after their third rescue failure. You stop caring very quickly about bloodlines, or banners, or whose faction gains influence from survival statistics. The silence deepened. You care whether the person beside you comes home alive. He folded his hands behind his back. What matters is responsibility. No one interrupted him. Interesting. You ask why I refused promotion. His gaze settled briefly on Valerian. Because I realized too many people around me had stopped viewing authority as responsibility. Now the room was completely still. They viewed it as ownership. Akeem's expression hardened slightly for the first time. I watched noble houses compete over public credit while civilians died beneath rubble. I watched officers prioritize political optics over extraction efficiency because success statistics affected funding negotiations. His jaw tightened. I watched men discuss sacrifice while standing safely outside its cost. Several military representatives lowered their eyes. I did not reject politics, Akeem continued. I rejected becoming useful to people who treated governance as a private acquisition. His gaze shifted then. To the king first. You worry whether I abandon duty. Edward held his stare steadily. Akeem inclined his head respectfully. I did not. I abandoned ambition, detached from service. Then Carlson, still furious, still protective, still visibly trying not to intervene. Akeem's expression softened almost imperceptibly. And you, he said quietly, are angry because you think loving someone compromised your judgment. Carlson froze. The entire chamber froze with him. Akeem continued before he could speak. Your Highness, the reason your selection test succeeded where this council failed is because you understood something most powerful people do not. Now he turned fully toward the gathered nobles. Competence without humility becomes dangerous. No one moved. No one spoke. Akeem's voice remained steady. Prince Carlson did not choose me because I was a hero. He chose me because I solved a simple problem honestly. A faint smile touched his mouth. And frankly, I think most of you still resent that. A few nobles stiffened visibly. Yes, Akeem said calmly. I see it. The room felt different now, not because he had won politically, because they were finally seeing him clearly. Not merely a soldier, not merely a consort, a leader, the kind forged by responsibility rather than inheritance. I believe politics is necessary, Akeem said finally. Empires do not survive on ideals alone. Laws matter, administration matters, power matters. He let the words settle before continuing. But power is a tool, nothing more. His pale eyes swept slowly across the chamber. A tool to feed people, protect people, organize people, build futures larger than ourselves. Then, quieter. The moment power becomes the goal itself, leadership rots. Silence. Heavy silence. Even Valerian no longer looked amused. Beside him, Carlson stared openly now with something deeper than admiration. Recognition. As though, for the first time since inheriting the throne unexpectedly, he had finally found someone who understood the exact shape of the ruler he wanted to become. And across the chamber, the nobility understood something equally dangerous. Prince Carlson had not married beneath him. He had chosen extraordinarily well.